Coming up next on Public Access TV is Fan to Fan, the book game. Today's guests are local authors and historians, Jim Parr and Kevin Swope, to tell us about one of their recent local area history books called Murder and Mayhem in Metrowest Boston and what it took to get into print. Stay tuned. You might feel a sense of historic tingling, but be careful, you might be in their next book. Welcome to another edition of Fan to Fan, the book game. I'm your host, Dave Hornfischer. Today I'm pleased to welcome Framingham-based authors Jim Parr and Kevin Swope to discuss one of their creative and informative pieces of Framingham and Metrowest history. This one is interestingly called Murder and Mayhem in Metrowest Boston. Guys, welcome. I think we picked a lively subject here to talk about among your many works, but well, why don't we begin by having each of you just talk a little bit about your own background before you decided to become authors about murders.
Right. Well, I taught in the Framingham Public Schools for 27 years. I retired a year and a half ago. Taught at McCarthy School. And I got involved in the Framingham History Center probably when Annie Murphy started. And I started putting together the Haunted Trolley Tour, if you remember that.
Right.
And that sort of led me to my partnership with Kevin and into writing, a lot of these history books that we've done together.
Have you always done writing even when you were school teaching? And
yeah, I was always writing poetry and articles, and but didn't really get anything published until the first Legends and Lore book that we did. Yeah.
Okay. And Kevin?
Yeah, I trained as a historian. I did graduate work in American history. And although I don't do that now, I work at Babson College in the fundraising office. But when I first moved to this area, it was about 20 years ago, I volunteered for the Framingham History Center in their research library to work alongside Fred Wallace. And so I started learning, I started out knowing nothing about local history here in Framingham, but because I'm not from this area. But, it only took a few years of volunteering there that I started learning. And Jim came in to research the Haunted Trolley Tour, which is how we first met now, but when I was working as a research volunteer there.
You told me of kind of a cute story about how Annie Murphy got you both involved in doing one of these books. Which one was it? Was the Legends and Lore book, or?
Yes, yeah. Oh. So the History Press they have books like this all over the country. And a lot of them are series too, like Legends and Lore, I think, is a series. And I believe, Kevin, that didn't the History Press contact the Framingham History Center because they realized it's such a big city and they did not have a Framingham book?
And we had several bookstores at that point. The Barnes & Noble was still here, and we had a Borders still. Yeah. So, I think their marketing department figured, they should have a book for Framingham. So they called up Annie Murphy at the History Center, and she said to me, you should do, you're a good writer, you should write this book. And meanwhile, she also said to Jim, you're a good writer, you have all these great stories from the Haunted Trolley Tour, you should do this book. And so Jim came in to do a little research on some of the other stories, I think. Yeah. And that's how we found out we were both writing this book. So, but it was, turned out to be a partnership made in Annie's mind anyway.
Yeah.
Because we worked great as co-authors. We had very, similar styles, and it really was quite easy to be co-authors.
We're the Lennon-McCartney of local histoy.
There you go. That's perfect. Yeah, who's Ringo? Huh? Yeah. Annie may, I guess. We better make sure she doesn't see this,
That's right.
Okay, so anyway, Murders and Mayhem, that sounds like a subject. Where did that idea germinate from, and how did you get into that?
I think that one of the stories that's in the book was actually the genesis of that, and it came from researching stories for the Haunted Trolley Tour. So if anyone's ever been on that, it's historical stories from Framingham. We kind of ran out of ghost stories, so we started looking up, murder stories, which are, sort of appropriate for Halloween.
Yeah.
And then just figured out we have enough stories here for a book. And we knew that the History Press has a series of murder and mayhem in different areas around the country. So we took a couple of those books out of the library to see, you know, how to set it up. And we do a lot of our research online in historic newspapers, and also at the Framingham History Center and other local historical societies.
And the History Center had stuff on these murders.
Yeah. Kevin, maybe now or later, will tell, you know, there was a photo archive of one of the murders.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, they actually had, we use a lot of their photos and documents as you know, to research these stories.
So you think this does wonders for Framingham and well, this is what you didn't just do Framingham, it's Metro West Boston.
Right.
So we're not saying Framingham is a murder capital.
No.
Metro West Boston, yeah.
Right.
Whitey Bulger would be proud of you guys.
Yeah, there's only 4 Framingham murders.
Right. They are the best murders, I have to say.
Yeah.
So let's get into the book itself here, since we're focusing on this book, and I know you guys have done other books, and we'll talk about that too. But so why let's start with it. So why these stories to begin with? Was there a pattern to what you were picking, or did you just kind of see this is good and sort out a bunch of stuff?
Well, they're historic. I mean, I think they range from 1820s or 30s?
1830s, yeah, to 1959.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So being, you know, historians, we wanted to make sure they were, and we thought that we were, you know, going back far enough so that we wouldn't really, you know, affect any people that are still living.
Okay.
But we found that not to be true. There are still some, you know, people like grandchildren of the victims and that, you know, found their way to our stories. But I think it was the first story that we're going to talk about, which was the Nina Danforth case, that really just got my. And what I love, Dave, is that these are stories that are in the, you know, these old newspaper archives, and nobody really has read them in 100 years.
Right.
And nobody knows these stories, and they're fascinating. Just the way people dealt with murder, the way the press treated the murder, the victims, and the criminals themselves, and in some ways it's very similar to, you know, today.
So we got the Danforth story here.
Yeah, well, this house lives, I live right near this house. This is on the south side. This is on Hartford Street. The house is still there. And I was reading this in the archives as if it were happening. You know, I would read it in chronological order. And it was an amazing story that has never been told about this young woman who believed she was married to this man who lived in Framingham, but he actually had a wife and several children. And they met while he was working on the railroad. He was all the livelong day. He was traveling from Framingham to Boston, and he was a fireman, which was the guy who stoked the fire. And he would see this young woman who, as you can see, she looks like she's about 8, but she was really 22. But she had some kind of birth defect, so they called her a dwarf, or, you know, the deformed young girl. And he convinced her that he got a fake like pastor to marry them, and then she found out, and that's when things really started to happen. And it was, you know, right down the street.
And she was convicted and locked up, and
she was, well, she ended up pleading, taking a plea deal, and she did not spend a lot of time in jail. She got a lot of sympathy. A lot of people thought he had it coming.
Okay.
And plus her disability, so she did spend a little bit of time in jail, but not very long.
Okay. So we move on now from this poor little girl to Blanche Anderson, and is the next one, I guess, that's coming up here.
Yes, and Blanche Anderson was one of the stories I wrote. She was born, her maiden name was Morse. She was from Natick.
The Morse Library?
Morse Library, the Morse Hospital.
Okay.
She was related to those families, but not, you know, there's a slightly different branch, a very eccentric branch, and she wasn't the only eccentric member of this family. But this story is actually, it's one of the rare instances of pure mayhem, as opposed to murder in her book.
Okay.
But Blanche was, you know, she was a housewife in Natick, and then she suddenly, I don't understand how, but she decided to impersonate a silent film actress. This was the 1920s. And so she convinced several people that she was actually Anna Q. Nilsson, who was a Swedish silent film star of the time. And one of the people she convinced was a person who ran the Milford Opera House in Milford, Massachusetts, which apparently at the time had a fairly sizable Swedish immigrant population there. And Anna Q. Nilsson was a huge star. So they decided to have a film festival, show some of her films, and have Anna Q. Nilsson herself, or AKA Blanche Morse Anderson, come and appear, and she was given flowers. But of course, because these people were ardent fans, as soon as she went on stage, they looked at her and they knew that she wasn't Anna Q. Nilsson. So that the picture was of her fleeing the stage in Milford Opera House.
That's when the mayhem occurred.
When the mayhem started.
I didn't see any tomatoes in the picture, but I imagine there might have been a few. Huh?
Yes, but it was a story that got picked up nationally. It was the one source I consulted was actually the San Francisco Examiner, who had a long story about this
Wow.
incident. Yeah. So.
And then, so from mayhem we go back to grisly murder of the Tucker murder.
Yeah, this was a huge case in Weston in 1904, and if people who grew up in Weston know this case pretty well. That house is on Route 30. It's still there, and it was a pretty well-to-do family. It was actually built as a summer house, the Page family. And Mabel was 41, so they considered her a spinster, unmarried. And she was stabbed to death in her own house in the middle of the day back in the spring of 1904. And they eventually settled on this man named Charles Tucker as a suspect. They found some of the items that were stolen in his possession. His wife had died under mysterious circumstances. He had admitted to being in the neighborhood. What I found fascinating was the press coverage. I mean, this was on the front page like every day. The Boston Post was kind of a yellow journalism
This was
rag.
the murder of the century in 1904. Right?
Well, there were quite a few murders of the century
Right.
back then.
Right. No, I've heard of some.
So here's Charles Tucker in the prisoner's cage. That
You have to look hard to find him.
Yeah, he doesn't look happy. And the thing is, justice was swift back then. It was 2 years between the time he was arrested and put on trial and then executed in the electric chair.
Really? Wow. And those were the lawyers.
Those were his lawyers.
Yeah.
And one of them, James Vahey, fought for years to try to get the death penalty overturned in Massachusetts.
Oh, really?
He's pretty well known for that.
Thinking that Tucker was justified, or just thinking it was harsh?
Well, today I don't think Tucker, if he were convicted, he obviously wouldn't get the death penalty, but it was circumstantial evidence. Women were sending him, bouquets of flowers and writing him letters, and he was, that happened a lot back then, which is one of the fun things about reading these stories is just people's responses.
The press was the tabloid journalism was was at its peak, I think, in some of those years. Yeah. Well, now we're moving along quickly to a Monaco story.
Yes. So Ella Monaco is the most recent case in our book. It was in Saxonville, neighborhood of Framingham, in 1959. This photo shows where her body was found. It was at the time that a lot of the Campanelli ranches in the north part of Framingham were being built. And this is actually Joseph Road, which they had just sort of laid out before they had started building the houses. And that's where she was murdered and the body was found. And, as Jim mentioned earlier, we deliberately didn't want to do anything too recent because we didn't want to sort of tread on people's feelings of, where, it was still fresh. But within, I think it was within a month of our book being published, I heard from the then 8-year-old boy who found the body, who's now a 70-year-old man living in Tennessee, who had found out about the book, and and I talked to him, and it was these events have real lasting impact. So even if they're forgotten in the bigger community, they really
This happened in the 1950s then.
Summer of 1959, and so one of the things when we looked for these stories was there has to have some, maybe not a twist necessarily, but some aspect of it that's a little bit different. That's has a more interesting story. It's not just a depressing story of a murder, but there are other aspects.
But they found the guy. and they convicted him.
No, in this case, this is unsolved.
No,
and
oh.
this is the only unsolved murder in our book. So they arrested. They interviewed several people, and but they never actually prosecuted anybody for the crime. There was a whole, and it's mentioned in the book, there was a whole backstory. The DA was AWOL at the time. He went away, and nobody knew where he was, the Middlesex County DA, and it turns out he was in Reno, Nevada, establishing residency so he could get divorced. So he wasn't around. So there was this, and then he resigned, so there was a little bit of chaos behind
And
the
we got
scenes.
one more then we got to fit in here somehow.
Yeah.
It's the D'Estasio. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, this was an interesting case. It was a father and son. This is 1934, 35, mid-1930s, and it took place in Hudson. And basically what happened was they picked up this fellow off the street in Boston, like promising him a job, offer him a job. They took him out to Hudson in the father's car, set fire to the car, left some of the father's personal effects in the car, so it seemed like the father died in this fire, and it was an insurance fraud case. And the name of the chapter is called "Torch Slayers Always Stupid," which was a headline in the Boston Globe about the case because it unraveled within 24 hours. They had both the father and the son arrested and in custody, and
It was solved with about the same length of this show.
yes.
Well,
This is using-
it seems like, well, based on what's happening today, there's probably an opportunity to write about 1,000 more books like this. I think you could make a career out of this, right? And
Well, some people do.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
but you guys have done a whole bunch of other books. Let's touch on them a little bit briefly here. You've done one, and we got it up in the back here, on Saxonville Mills. Was that one of your earlier collaborations?
It was our second book that we did together, and the first that we did with Lynn Damianos as publisher. So, but that grew out of a talk about at the Saxonville Mill put on by the Friends of Saxonville.
Okay.
This is Kevin's masterpiece.
Okay.
It is an amazing history of the Saxonville Mills.
And then we've got Framingham Legends and Lore. I mean, I guess these murders are legends and lore in themselves, right? But
Yeah.
And I think you touched on that when you talked about the trolley tours, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so Legends and Lore is, I like the way we work as a team. I like to focus on, the interesting story, and Kevin is really good at giving it historical background. So there's a lot of, Framingham history that goes a little bit deeper than some of the other histories that have been published
Yeah.
in that book.
Yeah, there's some great stories in that. I've got that book. I know I've read through some of it. And, that along. There's a number of books about Framingham. There's a famous history book about Framingham that I think I have up in back of me here.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
the herring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which gets a lot of coverage. And you also did a couple other ones. You've done each of you have done some books on your own, right?
Yeah, we did a collaboration of poems called Milestones. I wrote the poems, and they were based on Framingham historical artifacts, and a lot of them used to be featured in the third grade field trip. And Kevin wrote the historical background for those.
Okay. Then you've got. I see we've got. My Name is James. That must have been one of yours.
That's a poetry book. Yeah, his name's Kevin.
Kevin.
I guess our last one we did was we wrote a history of the Bancroft Building,
Oh, right.
where
That's way up in the corner. I don't think you can.
the
quite see
long
that.
car manufacturing was, and they manufactured hats there, and that was at the time given out to all of the new tenants there in those new apartments.
Yeah, once they converted it to apartments. It used to be the Fountain Street Studios before that. So,
Oh, right. Yeah.
so we had, so we talked about all the different adaptive reuses of the building that was originally built.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, as a shoe factory, actually.
So that's all together as an apartment building now. It is.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more to come
okay.
apparently.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So doing some more.
Yeah, they sure are. So you've done all these books, and so what's been the process by which you've got these actually done? You mentioned working with Damianos Publishing, and we've had Lynn on this show a number of times, and you worked with others as well, or how do you decide who you're gonna work with to pull these together?
Well, the History Press, they have lots and lots of books. So if we come up with a story idea, like
That's a national organization?
yes, yeah, it's part of Arcadia.
Oh, okay.
So we can kind of tell that based on a lot of their previous publications, what they're looking for, and that it would have to have a bigger audience. And then some of our personal projects, we've gone through Lynn,
Okay.
Damiano's Publishing.
So the Murder and Mayhem, has that sold quite a few books? Or?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's sold pretty well.
Yeah.
we don't get figures.
Oh, you don't? Oh, the publishers
Well,
don't
we
send
get
you-
figures, we get,
Yeah.
but they aren't as straightforward as perhaps one would wish.
Oh,
Yeah, but the Legends and Lore has been out for 15 years, and it's still in print, and there's digital copies that you can get for your Kindle. So I assume they're still,
yeah. And you work pretty closely with the Framingham History Center on promoting the books. I know, giving lectures at different times. And
Yeah, we've given talks on pretty much all the books at the Framingham History Center, and then because we're both involved there as volunteers and doing research there, that we basically use a lot of their materials, but at the same time we in turn often donate books to the Framingham History Center that are produced with them, so they can sell them and be able to make money off of it in this form.
so if one wanted to buy these easy, one could just go to the History Center and buy it.
Absolutely, the history books are all available at the Framingham History Center.
And yours are all. Do you each have your own website where you promote these? Or
I do a lot of my
do you let
promotion on
Amazon?
Facebook.
Okay.
I have a blog about Dedham. I wrote a book about Dedham, but we don't have any like a Framingham online presence. Maybe we should change that, like in the future.
It might make it a bit easier.
Yeah.
But the books are also available, any
On Amazon?
Amazon, and Barnes and Noble,
Yeah. Walgreens, BJ's, we've seen them. The History Press gets into a lot of these, because they're hyper local. So
Okay.
I think we sold the most copies of the Saxonville Mills book at Robinson's Hardware, which is in the Pinefield Plaza right across
Right
the street
there, of
from
course.
there.
Yeah.
So they just had some on the counter, and we just restocked them when they sold them.
Yeah,
So they're
framed in time.
framed in time,
Yeah.
which is in the Saxonville
Right,
Mills. So sometimes unconventional marketing works.
So have you needed some help on some of these things with graphics, and have you had other people work with you on some of the figuring out which font to use and all the other technicalities of getting a book out? And,
Yes. Lynn has different people that she employs. Lynn Damiano's, Damiano's Publishing.
yeah.
And then the History Press, they do it all. So
Oh, okay.
they have on staff people.
So once they make a deal with you, it's their project to take it to the goal line.
And
yeah.
we have some say, where they place the photos, but they kind of choose the covers. We write the blurbs.
Do you have to be asked by the History Press, or do people make proposals to them? That sounds like too good of a deal.
I would imagine that people make proposals to them, and I think they look at where the person lives, and we have to do we have to fill out a questionnaire about where we're going to sell them and what our audience is. So they do a lot of market research.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that they were kind of looking for some books in a certain area. The Murder and Mayhem, was that the one?
And Legends of Lore was the one they
Lore,
originally
okay.
were looking.
Yeah.
And I think once we did the first one, and they did, they sold a fair number of those because we did promotions to the History Center. The History, you still sell them at the History Center.
Right.
So that sort of got us, enough credibility. So when we
Got on their radar. Yeah.
right, so when we make a proposal for the, a book for their Murder and Mayhem series, they know that. We'll go do talks and we'll promote it, and we can put together an actual readable book.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And we have a contact there now. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, what's next? I guess.
Who's up first? Oh, I guess I am. So I have a book by myself. So Lennon McCartney, we're doing our solo projects now. And I have a book called World War II Massachusetts, which is coming out on March 4th, which is kind of appropriate.
Oh, that's great. March 4th. John Philip Sousa Day.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this is a book that covers, the whole of the state, but it's the home front. So when I tell people I was writing a World War II book, they said, "Oh, my father was," and I said, "Well, this isn't about your father. It's about your mother or your grandmother." or your uncle who was, 10 years old. It's about kids collecting, cans and paper and scrap, and it's about, everything that was going on in the home front.
The Victory Gardens.
Yeah, yep, they're in there. And also some surprises, things that I just never knew. Dogs for Defense. People were shipping their pet dogs off to
Really?
Burma to find, snipers in the jungle. There's so many stories that I found. So
Well, we always hear about Rosie the Riveter. And
yep, there's a little bit of that in there too. Yeah. So
so and that's going to be out in March then.
yep.
Yeah.
And that'll be available, wherever books are sold.
Whenever books on
And I
Amazon.com.
think I'm doing a book signing at the History Center.
Oh, okay.
But they'll
Well, this
send
show
out.
will be on before March.
Yeah.
So,
So come to the History Center.
Okay. Well, they have a lot of good stuff there, that's for sure. We'll promote the History Center a bit. Yeah. And Kevin, you're doing one on some photographs.
Right. I've got basically two in the works. One, I'm branching out. I'm doing a local history about Penzance Point and Woods Hole, which is where my family has a summer place. And in the course of, and that's in very early research, but in the course of doing that, I went back and scanned my grandfather's and the boxes of his negatives from the 1930s, just to look for old photos of Woods Hole. And I found there actually weren't that many good photos for that book, but he actually had a very good eye, and I was amazed at the quality of the photos, and they were actually interesting. I posted some of them online, and people really responded to them as he was an amateur photographer. He was a lawyer working in a law firm in New York at the time, but he would take pictures of Fulton Street Fish Market, during his lunch hour or anything else. This photo is it's a very early selfie, but this is a bathroom selfie.
Ah, that's a camera in his hand.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's his 38 millimeter camera, and so that's my grandfather, Gerard Swope Jr. And so that's a self-portrait he took in a bathroom mirror back then. So the name of the book is going to be called 1938 Photographs by Gerard Swope Jr. because he took a tremendous number of images in that year. I think it was both because it was a new enthusiasm and also because his younger brother had become a professional photographer. And so he was very competitive, if nothing else. So he wanted to prove he could take good pictures.
Well, that'll be interesting. And so is that going to be out this year?
It'll probably be by the end of the year. I'm doing that with Linda, to be honest.
Oh,
So,
terrific.
yep.
Well, as I warned you beforehand, the 28 minutes here has a way of flying by, and we are at that inflection point. So I have to thank the both of you for all of what you do for Framingham. You're a couple of great volunteers at the History Center, I know, and your programs are always interesting. Whenever you're on, I always make a chance to always try to catch one. And speaking of catching things, we hope you folks will come back and watch Fan to Fan, the book game. We're on Framingham Public Access TV Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Friday nights at 8:30, and Saturday mornings at 8:30. And some stations around Massachusetts and other places are picking us up too. So if you're enjoying these shows, drop a note to Access Framingham at 4 Vernon Street in Framingham and let them know. Thanks for watching, and it's been great. And thank you again, my two guests and two friends. Thank you.